And if you were here last week, you know that we revisited Psalm 1. And we talked a lot about trees. And I've had some really interesting conversations last Sunday after church and since then about trees. I don't know if you've been thinking about trees. I think you have to think about trees after yesterday. And if you came out of your house at all, you saw trees falling over, you saw branches on the road, you saw trees on power lines. And my challenge to you last week was to think about what kind of a tree are you? Or if you could choose to model yourself after a particular type of tree, what kind of tree would that be? What would you strive for? Or maybe you already know yourself well enough to say, I'm like this kind of tree. And I gave you the example for myself that I would like to be like a willow tree. Those massive trees that just kind of drape down by a river or a stream or a lake. I was at a campground this summer, and there was all kinds of willow trees, and you just wanted to set up your hammock in that tree and lay down and relax and just let it shade you from the sun. And for me, I know I've got a ways to go, but that's the kind of tree I would like to be like. Here are, I don't know if I'm going to get this right, Paul, you might have to help me out. Can you just advance it to the next slide? Here's a whole bunch of trees. You may not be able to see very well from where you are what they all are, but bottom left-hand corner, giant buttress, root system, a strong tree that anchors, provides support. Along the top three, trees that in the fall provide that incredible color, beauty. When people look at you, they see joy and beauty in your life. Thank you. It might be a cedar hedge that provides protection, or a row of poplar trees like you might see on the prairies that protects against the wind. I don't know what kind of tree you imagine yourself to be, but I want you to think about that again today, because we're going to come back to this in a few minutes. I'm on the clock today. My daughter says you have 20 minutes. When 20 minutes is up, I'm going to do something that everyone will know. I'm going to stand up, or I'm going to wave my hands, or I'm going to walk out. So we'll see what happens at 20 minutes. I want to talk about the rest of Psalm chapter 1 today. Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of the corrupt. But their delight is in the law of the Lord. And day and night they meditate on this law. They are like a tree planted by streams of living water, which yields its fruit in season, whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers. So not the wicked. That takes us into the second half of this. So not the wicked. And when this psalm was written, there's a huge contrast. First 3 verses talk about what it means to seek after and follow God. Verses 4, 5, and 6 flip it around and say, this is the other side of the coin. This is the other path you could take. Not so the wicked. And that word wicked, which I want to talk about today, is mentioned in this psalm, I think, 4 times. Wicked or wickedness. So what does it mean to be wicked? I've been thinking about that word all week. Wickedness. Where have I seen it? Do I know anybody who I would say, they're wicked? And I don't. But I can think of lots of wicked things, and all of us can. We talked about the media last week, about the news, and how extraordinary events happen to usually a very small percentage of people. But it still happens. And we can think of the ISIS group in the Middle East and what they are doing. Pure wickedness. We can think of child soldiers in the Congo. We can think of famine, the Taliban in Afghanistan. There are people, and we might even say events, that are wicked. But usually, at least in my experience as a Canadian and someone living in Langley, those types of wickedness don't really touch us. So then what do we do with this idea of wicked? Is there wickedness in our culture? Is there wickedness in our lives? If so, what does it look like? And today I want to suggest that the wickedness that you and I experience often is good intentions. You've heard the phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I want to explore the rest of this psalm, verses 4, 5, and 6 today, and look at this idea of what does it mean to be wicked with good intentions that don't get fulfilled. The very next verse, well, if I back up and say verse 1 again, not so the wicked, they are like chaff that is blown away by the wind. And I think the writer really gets at something in our culture that can connect us to wickedness, and that is chaff. Now, I don't know if you know what chaff is. I really don't. Anybody here come from a farming background and you remember wheat being thrown in the air so the wind would take the chaff away? Anybody know that firsthand? Okay, a few of us. Most of us, especially if you're my age or younger, when you hear the word chaff, you can't even imagine that concept. But chaff, if I understand it, and one of you put your hand up can correct me, is this papery fiber that's connected to the kernels of wheat on the head of that stalk. And when the wheat is thrown up, it's lighter than the kernels of wheat, and the kernels fall, and the chaff naturally just separates and gets blown away. So, how can we visualize chaff? Well, I've brought 3 different examples today that I think we can relate to a little bit better when it comes to chaff. Because in the Amplified Bible, it describes chaff as being useless, dead, without substance. It's pretty bleak. But really, that's what chaff is to the farmer. And so I can take my piece of plywood and scribble with pencil, and then take my nice big white gum eraser, and I'm going to start erasing those mistakes. And we all know from school, before we could type or wanted to type or could type, we had to get that eraser, and what do we got? Chaff. Eraser shavings. Completely useless to what we're doing. I've never met someone who said, well, no, I want to save the eraser shavings. Please, let's sweep those up. I have a project I can do it. No. That's ridiculous. No one would ever say there's something purposeful or useful about eraser shavings. At least I've never heard it. Another illustration, if I want to go a little bit faster to get rid of those pencil marks, I can sand, and you can see where this is going. Sawdust. Completely useless. Dead. I don't need it for anything. If I was to create a pile of it, maybe someone could use it, put it on their blueberry plants. But just the dust from this board, chaff. Don't need it. Ben's going to come up and help me for this last one. Where did I put that, Benjamin? Here it is. If you've ever sprayed something with a spray bomb, okay, let's move away from Patrick so he doesn't get a face full. You know that if you don't spray evenly, yeah, go ahead. Good. You get a lot of overspray. And only a little bit of that paint, thanks Ben, got on the wood. The rest, I can smell it in the air, or it's fallen to the ground, and it's dried, and I can sweep it up later. Chaff. Useless, dead. There's no use for that overspray. So I think we understand what the writer is saying by chaff. It's something that has no importance It's useless. It's dead. And the writer says the wicked are like chaff. I think we have chaff in our culture. I think there's things like the eraser shavings, the dust, the overspray that are completely useless. And if we pursue those useless things, they become a distraction. I'd like to hear from you for a minute. Something in our culture in Canada that you would call or use the label chaff. It's part of our culture. People admire it, use it, chase after it. But really, if we're honest, it's got no purpose. It's a dead end. It's useless. It's a distraction. Anybody? Just by a raise of hand? Say that again. Oh, that's controversial, but I like it. Political correctness. It's got a purpose, but we all know that it can get ridiculous if we pursue it too far. Yep. Racism. Okay, can you explain that just a little bit? I think I know what you mean. Okay. So not the idea of racism, but the idea of being racist. Criticizing other ethnic groups or persecuting them. What else might be chaff? Yep. Compromising. Can you explain that just a little bit? What you mean by that?
Well, if you got something that's firm and solid, and you compromise, you degrade or destroy
Okay.
the foundation of that firmness and solidness.
So not compromising as to come to an agreement with someone, but compromising as lowering your expectation and standard. Okay, good. Yes? The Kardashians! Who hasn't been in the Safeway checkout and your eyes have been drawn to Kim Kardashian or one of her sisters, and you've been sucked in, and you've been pulled into this vortex of darkness, and suddenly you wake up when it's your turn, you go, what have I just done? I know more about the Kardashians than I wanted to. Yes. Yeah, yes. Yeah, that media, the celebrities, all of that. Great example. One more. Who's got an example of chaff? Useless, mindless. Yeah. Pardon? Apathy? Okay. Yeah, apathy. Yeah, that kind of ties in well with what we're going to look at today, the good intention that you never get to. Yes, sir. Yes. Okay, good. The magazines and newspapers and TV ads and all the rest of it. So we understand chaff in our culture. Jesus in Matthew 25 talks about good intentions. Talks about people who, instead of being that tree of purpose, whatever that is, an oak tree, a maple tree, a cottonwood, a cedar hedge, they end up living a life that looks more like chaff, the pursuit of chaff, those dead, useless things. And in Matthew 25, he describes a rich man who's going on vacation. And you've probably heard this parable before. If you haven't, you're going to hear it right now real quick. And he has 3 servants, managers, however we want to describe them, that he leaves in charge to look after his resource. And Jesus uses the metaphor, makes it real simple for the people, and says he gives them each a bag of gold. A certain amount of money that while he's away, they are going to have to take care of, invest, manage. The first one he gives 5 bags of gold. He goes out, reinvests it, works it, comes back with another 5, doubles it for 10. The second man, he gives 2 bags of gold. Same thing happens while the owner's away. He goes, works it, makes some good business decisions, comes back with 4. The last one has 1 bag of gold. He comes back. When the owner comes back, this man still has only 1 bag of gold. And he hasn't doubled it like everybody else. And the owner says to this man, what were you doing while I was away? Look at your fellow workers. They invested, they managed, they made good decisions, and they doubled my money. And they showed me that they're trustworthy. And the servant says, I was afraid. All I did was I hid it so I didn't lose what you gave me. but I was worried that I might lose it and something would happen to it. And the words that come out of Jesus' mouth to that man are, "You lazy, wicked servant." Good intentions. The man wanted to do something with it. He hoped he could please the owner, but in the end, his good intentions probably lost him everything he knew in his relationship with that owner. Trust, maybe a job. Good intentions. There is a famous quote that I love. I came across this about 20 years ago in one of my colleagues' classrooms, and I've never forgotten it. Edmund Burke from the 18th century, he was an official in the English government, and he's usually attributed with saying this: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men, women, children to do nothing." In other words, if all we have is good intentions, evil will probably prevail in our own lives, in the Middle East, on the continent of Africa, wherever it might be. Evil will prevail. And I want to tell you 3 short stories to really illustrate this idea of what happens when we have just good intentions, when we are living a life like chaff, and we're always saying, well, this would be a good idea. First one is this. In World War II, the state church, the Lutheran Church in Germany, while Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were in power, began to compromise. And one of the biggest compromises they made visually was on the altar, where they would have the Bible, where they would celebrate the Lord's Supper with the bread and the wine. They put a German flag with a swastika on it. It went on the altar so that when you came to church, you would see the cross, you might see an organ, an instrument, and you would see that German flag. And over the years of the German power, the state church began to associate itself with what the Nazi regime was doing. And in the book Hitler's Cross, it tells the story of churches that lived by railway tracks. And on Sunday mornings when they were worshiping with their flag on the altar, the train would go by, and they knew who was in those trains. They knew that they were people that the Nazis had marginalized and said they were no good, and they were sending them to camps. And in order to appease their conscience, they would try and time the singing of hymns during when that train would pass. And as they were singing the hymn, if they could still hear the train cars, they would sing even louder. I don't know what their intentions were, if they thought about doing something different. But during those services, whatever intention they had was simply leading to wickedness by ignoring it. My second story happened to myself. July 1st, 1985, Victoria, in front of the Empress Hotel. I don't know if you can picture it, if you've been downtown Victoria in the Inner Harbor. Craziness. The streets are blocked off. The Victoria Symphony has just played. People are getting ready for the fireworks for Canada Day. And there are thousands of people just walking around. And if a lot of them were like me, a lot of them were just looking for trouble. Because I was just looking for trouble, just looking to have fun. I was 17, I was looking for girls, I was with my buddies, and we're just walking around hoping something interesting is going to happen. Well, it did. We came up to an intersection where cars could go one direction away from the Inner Harbor, and so they were stopped at a light. The other direction was blocked off, barricaded, you couldn't go. And as we got up to the intersection, we heard murmuring, and people were just kind of standing. No one was moving across the intersection. So the intersection was people on 4 sides. And in the middle was like a giant empty square. And everyone's just standing. And we're like, something's going on. We got to get closer. So we start to wiggle through, and we're getting closer. And I'm a little bit taller than the average person, so on my tiptoes, I could see that just to one edge of the square, in front of a vehicle that had been waiting for a red light to go out of town, there was a man on the ground. And there was two other men standing over him, putting the boots to him. This was not a fight. This was a beating. And I don't know how it started, but I can't forget 500, 600, 800 people like they're at a boxing match watching. And I remember thinking to myself, we need to do something. That was my good intention. I never got to act on that good intention because the police came in and stopped it and pulled the two men off. But the question I have to ask myself, if the police hadn't showed up, would I just have been stuck with good intentions? Or would I and my buddies have walked in to the middle and pulled this apart at the risk of our own safety? Good intentions can often lead to wickedness. My last story is this. I used to teach woodworking at Abbotsford Christian Secondary School, and we had a little room that we would use for finishing. Spray painting, varathaning, oiling, whatever it was. Had a nice big vent, pulled all the fumes out. Kids could go back there. And my rule was, when you used a spray bomb, like this one, it only sprayed the project. You can imagine a 13-year-old boy with a spray can in a room by himself. And I knew the mind of a 13-year-old boy. And so every time I sent someone back there, I said, only the project gets sprayed. One day after I dismissed a grade 8 class, I walked in to the finishing room, and behind the table where they would spray their projects on the wall was this. That's it. Someone had just tested out the spray can, or after they'd finished spraying their little metal project, had given a little burst. And I thought, uh-oh, what's going to happen? Well, I had to go to another class and leave the shop, and I didn't have time to paint over it or take something and clean it off, so I just left it and I forgot about it. The next day, after my grade 8 class was in there, I walked into the room, and there was 4 or 5 marks on the same wall. Just kind of a shh, nothing terrible. And again, I was in a rush. I had to leave quickly, and I forgot about it. I didn't see a class for 2 more days, and on Friday afternoon, I walked into that room, and there were 10 or 12 swastikas painted on all 4 walls. Human nature. Human nature. I was reminded how quickly, if our purpose and our pursuit is not goodness, that we quickly default to what is easy, what is simple, what is convenient, to what is wicked. Now, we might not describe what happened as wickedness. In fact, I'm pretty sure the boys who did that really didn't understand the meaning of that symbol. But the point was, they defaced the room, and they knew they were doing that. The wickedness of good intentions. Are we to live like chaff, dead, useless, without substance? Are we to live, as the author says, like a tree planted by streams of living water? The rest of this text goes on, verse 5. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. If you are a follower of Jesus, what does that mean? This is what I think it means. if you believe that the world has been created with purpose and with order, if you believe that in our choices, disobedience and sinfulness and wickedness has entered the world, and if you believe that God, Elohim, Creator God, is going to restore the world and is in the process of restoring it by becoming human, becoming flesh in Jesus, and if you have that hope that this world, this creation will be restored to perfection once again, then you are a follower of Jesus. That's what I think that means. And if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, you are obligated. That's an ugly big word, obligated. None of us like to be obligated to do anything, right? We're tied, we're connected, we can't get out of it. You are obligated to participate in God's kingdom. The restoration process that He is unfolding right now and will continue to unfold until Jesus returns and says, the kingdom is complete. And to be part of that process, to be part of that kingdom building, that restoration, means we have to make a choice every single day. We can choose to be that tree that provides shade or strength or beauty or joy or wisdom or protection for the people in the world that we connect with, or we can lead a life like chaff, dead, useless, without substance, going nowhere. And that is the challenge that we have to wrestle with every single day if we are followers of Jesus.